Here we're still continuing with function versus non-function, but now we're working with graphs. So in order to determine whether a graph is a function or non-function, we're going to use the vertical line test. So what I mean by vertical line test is that you can draw vertical lines, and how many times you draw is up to you, but basically up to an infinite amount of vertical lines. And to check if the graph line, in this case our black line right here, to see how many times it touches the vertical line. So with the vertical line test, if the graph line touches the vertical line once each time you check, that means it's considered a function. So let me show you with our first graph right here. So I'm using this ruler to illustrate our vertical line test. So it's this side right here. So I'm going to be slowly moving from the left towards the right, but imagine that I'm drawing so many vertical line tests. Again, it could be up to 10 to 100 to an infinite amount, just to check if it's going to be a function. So as I'm moving slowly towards the right, you notice how the graph line is basically crossing or touching my vertical line test once. So basically each time I stop, the graph will be crossing or touching the vertical line. So as I reach to the right, at all points that I went through, the graph line touches the vertical line once. So imagine I stop here. Basically the graph touches the vertical line once. If I stop here, it touches the vertical line once. If I stop here, it touches the vertical line once. So it is considered a function. So again, you can draw 5 vertical lines, 10 vertical lines, 50 vertical lines, 100, up to an infinite amount of vertical lines. And as long as you see a pattern where the graph touches the vertical line once each time you check, it is a function. So let's take a look at the second graph. So slowly moving from the left towards the right, as I'm checking, I still see that my graph is basically touching the vertical line once. So that means I'm pretty good to keep going. And even though my graph, it went down and back up, as long as the graph is touching the vertical or crossing the vertical line, that means that it's still considered a function. So as I reach to the right, each time I check my graph with the vertical line, the graph only crosses the vertical line once for each time I check, so therefore the second one is a function. So the first and second graph is a function. Let's take a look at the second graph. So at this point, at the very beginning, it touches the vertical line once, but as I start moving towards the right, I notice that I'm actually touching the vertical line twice, one up here and one down here. So I'm going to check again by moving more towards the right. It's still, the graph is touching the vertical line twice, one up here, one down here. So the moment you see that the graph touches the vertical line more than once, that means you can stop there, and this will be a non-function. So I'm going to write non-function here. So again, regardless where I put my vertical line, I could put right here, or near towards the right. You see how the graph is touching my vertical line, one up here, one down here, so twice. If the graph touches or crosses the vertical line more than once, then it's a non-function. Again, in order to be a function, it has to crosses or touches the vertical line once each time you check. Now let's take a look at our fourth graph right here. So as I'm progressing from the left towards the right, I'm slowly moving and I'm checking. And while I'm checking it, I still see that my graph function is crossing or touching the vertical line. So it's still a function, and it's crossing one time, not more than once. So if it's more than once, then it is a non-function. But at the moment, it's crossing my vertical line once each time I check, and as I'm near towards the right, all the points that I checked, it crosses or touches the vertical line once. So this one, the last graph, is a function. So this is the only function where, when you use the vertical line test, the graph touches the vertical line more than once. When that happens, non-function. But all the other graphs only touches the vertical line each time you checked. So that's how you determine a graph where it's a function or a non-function. So there's basically two rules to memorize how to determine if it's a function or non-function with graph. Function is when the graph crosses or touches the vertical line at most once. For non-function, the graph crosses or touches the vertical line more than once. So those are basically the two rules you have to memorize in determining if a graph is a function or non-function. So make sure you have that in your notes and memorize it. It's fairly easy.